Hey, good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you. Welcome back to what I call my morning musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterism Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And boy, I've been reading a really fascinating book. It is entitled The Resurrection of the Dead in Early Judaism, 200 BC to 200 AD by C.D. Elledge. He makes some really fascinating observations, and not only are they fascinating, they're very challenging to the modern concepts. And so I'm really enjoying reading this book. And thank you again for joining me. Well, we have been examining the challenge of Christ for several months, and I have been sharing with you Jesus's words. Just this last week, I was reading some comments by some leading rabbis who were commenting on Jesus' prediction that he was going to come with the angels and reward every man in his lifetime, or in his generation, I should say. And these rabbis were saying, this very clearly proves that Jesus cannot be the Messiah. He cannot be the Son of God, because everyone knows he didn't come back. He didn't put an end to human history. Well, listen, far too many Christians take the challenge of Christ too lightly. R.C. Sproul, some years ago now, acknowledged the reality of Jesus' predictions. He acknowledged the challenge of Christ and how it has perplexed the church for literally centuries. And he said, while the church has struggled with this issue, it is time for the church to come face to face with the challenge of Christ that he and his apostles did unequivocally, undeniably affirm that the end of the age, the judgment, the coming of the Lord was supposed to happen in the first century. He called attention to how the creeds do not address this, and how the creeds still put Jesus' coming, the judgment, the end of the age, off into the future. And Sproul says this, I can deal with the fact, I can accept that the creeds could be wrong. They're not inspired. I can accept that the church fathers, as he calls them, were wrong because they're not inspired. But I cannot accept the premise that Jesus was wrong, that the apostles were wrong. So he didn't know where to turn. And by the way, this is all in his book, The Last Days According to Jesus. And Sproul finally came down and saying, well, we have to acknowledge the incredible redemptive historical significance of the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70. Do you know why he winds up still postulating a yet future coming of the Lord? In spite of all the New Testament statements that it was at hand, coming soon, near, and shortly in the first century, he winds up essentially ignoring those comments, although trying to deal with them, but he ultimately winds up ignoring them because, after all, he says the New Testament predicted a literal physical resurrection of physical bodies out of the grave. Not really. And thus his presuppositional, his a priori, his traditional views of the resurrection, the coming of the Lord, and the judgment overrode what he acknowledged to be the challenge of Christ, and that is that Jesus and his apostles said all of those things were to be in the first century. Listen, folks, this is serious. All right? This is genuinely serious stuff. When scholars such as R.C. Sproul acknowledge the difficulty, they acknowledge the challenge, then it truly is time for the church to wake up. It truly is time for us to acknowledge the problem, to stop trying to argue away or to ignore the language of Jesus and his apostles. You know, on Facebook just the other day, one former preterist claimed, I was literally stunned when I read this, claimed that such German higher scholars, critics, such as Rudolf Bultmann, earlier David Strauss, Schweitzer, Albert Schweitzer, they all, quote, created the crisis of imminence. Folks, this is stunning. Anyone making the claim that a crisis over the imminent statements of the Bible was created by men such as Bultmann, Schweitzer, Strauss, etc., that's the height of unscholarliness. That is utterly, I mean, it's beyond weird, it's beyond crazy, it's way beyond false. Those men did not create the crisis. And so on this program, week to week, I have been appealing to you. I have been appealing to you to come face to face with this crisis, to confront the challenge of Jesus. When Jesus said, the Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels, and shall reward every man according to his works. And verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. You know, honestly, I don't know how words could get any clearer. How could words be clearer than the Son of Man is coming? Some of you will not die until you see the Son of Man coming. How much clearer could that be? I want to say as kindly as possible, but as forcefully as possible, if it were not for the preconceived ideas about a literalistic, physical, earthly kingdom, a nationalistic, physical king sitting on a physical throne on physical earth, if it were not for the preconceived ideas of Jesus coming back as a 5'5" Jewish man riding on a literal cloud out of heaven at some proposed, but imaginary, end of time, if it wasn't for those preconceived ideas, we could answer the challenge of Christ posed to us by the Muslims, the Jews, the atheists, and all skeptics. If we were better Bible students of the Hebraic apocalyptic language, the common Hebraic metaphoric language, the common Hebraic hyperbolic apocalyptic language, we would be better equipped to answer the challenge of Christ. So that's what I've been sharing with you over these last several months. Since last August, trying to equip us all to know, number one, Jesus did predict his coming was going to occur in the first century. To acknowledge that fact, to stop denying that fact. Number two, to realize he said he was going to come back in the glory of the Father, as the Father had come many times in the past. We're going to get to that in the morning, here just momentarily, in just a few moments at least. Number three, he was going to act in judgment as he had seen the Father act in judgment many times, John 5:21 and following. And yet remember, he had never, ever, ever seen the Father come out of heaven in a physical body on literal clouds and destroy literal physical heaven and earth. He had never seen that. And yet he said he was going to act in judgment in the same way he had seen the Father act in judgment. Do you catch the power of that? Folks, this is absolutely incredible. And it's so important. And as I talk to people on a very daily basis, on the internet and on Facebook and on YouTube, I can assure you of this. I was on an internet talk show just the other night, and they were asking me how preterism is growing. One individual said, well, I don't even try to share the message of fulfillment with preachers. Preachers are too financially invested in order to make the sacrifice. Because if they step out and if they proclaim that all Bible prophecy is fulfilled, as Jesus said it was going to be, Luke 21:22, in AD 70, they're going to lose their jobs. Believe me, I know. I went through it. It's not a happy experience, but it's more than worth the price. Nonetheless, I shared with these individuals on this internet show, I said, I am hearing from more preachers today who are coming to understand covenant eschatology, another name for full preterism. I am hearing from more preachers today than I have heard from in all of my previous years in this movement. It is incredibly exciting. Now, I have said this on many occasions. There are many of you out there, okay? Yes, there are. There are many of you out there who have probably been sitting in the pews, as one correspondent said to me just this last week. This correspondent said, you know what, for years and years and years, I would be sitting there in the pew, I'd be listening to the preacher, I'd have the scriptures open to the passages that he was citing, quoting, and his discussion of those passages, and I would hear one thing coming from the pulpit, I would see another thing on the pages of Scripture. And I would be thinking, no. This is not what he's saying. He is not saying what I'm reading from right here. And he said, but I would think to myself, well, I don't have my doctorate. I'm not a Bible scholar. I'm not a debater. All I know is what I'm hearing is not what I'm reading. But he said, I discovered your YouTube videos. Listen to me, folks. On YouTube, if you want to be able to watch literally 1,000+ videos that I have produced on YouTube, free of charge, totally free of charge. But I have produced over 1,500 videos. Most of them are no longer than 15 minutes, all right? And this individual told me, he said, I literally stumbled upon your YouTube videos by accident. And he said, now I binge watch one after another. And he said, it is absolutely amazing and liberating to hear what you're saying and to read my Bible and to see, hey, yeah, that's exactly what the Bible is saying. And I'm hearing from that kind of an individual every single week, sometimes every single day of every single week. So once again, I invite you to join me on this journey. I invite you and I encourage you to have the courage, the integrity, the open-mindedness to be able to rethink, to confront the challenge of Christ, to deal with the fact that, yes, indeed, as just noted a moment ago, Jesus did say he was coming back on the clouds of heaven in power and great glory in that generation, the first century generation. His apostles reiterated the same identical promises. That's the challenge of Christ. If you hold, as I once did, I believed in it firmly, I taught it, I preached it, I even debated it. If you believe in the coming of the Lord as a yet future event, then you have not yet confronted the challenge of Christ. And I invite you to do so. Now, I've been sharing with you, you have to pardon me, my allergies are terrible. I probably sound like I'm talking in a barrel this morning. I didn't take my allergy medicine last night, so, I've got all this going on. So, again, I apologize. They said on the TV just the other day that our mountain cedar pollen count, and mountain cedars are my numero uno allergen, but the mountain cedar pollen count is at a historic high. Oh, great. Yeah, thrilling. Yeah, believe you me, I know it. Okay. All right, moving on. So, what we have is Jesus' statement, and by the way, we've been focused on Matthew 16, 27, and 28, right? But I can assure you there are many other passages in the New Testament in which not only Jesus, but his apostles, the writers of the New Testament, they also said that the coming of the Lord, the judgment, the resurrection, etc., was coming soon in the first century. Now, yes, we're going to get to an examination of 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8 and 9. One day is with the Lord 1,000 years as a day. I'm going to show you that comment by Peter does not mean, hey, look, folks, I told you that the coming of the Lord was coming soon. It was at hand and coming quickly. I know I said that, but hey, you know what? It doesn't mean anything. I didn't really mean anything by it. Really? I mean, that's like saying your house is on fire. Okay, imagine this with me. Your house is on fire. You call the fire station. My house is on fire. My house is on fire. You got to come put it out. And the guy, the fire chief says, we'll be there shortly. We're coming quickly. But they don't come. Your house burns down. You rebuild the house. And 5 years later, you hear the blaring sirens. And you look up and here comes a fire truck just blasting down your street, comes screeching to a halt in front of your house, and they jump out and say, we're here, we're here. And you're going, here for what? They said, well, you called us and said your house was on fire. And you go, wait a minute, guys. You told me you were coming quickly. You'd be here shortly. And they go, oh, yeah, we know we said we'd come quickly and shortly, but, time doesn't mean anything. And, oh, by the way, we didn't mean we're coming soon. We just meant that when we finally got around to coming, we were going to drive as fast as we could. Really? Look, folks, you know that's ridiculous. You know that doesn't work. So anyway, I've been sharing with you, how some people try to deal with the imminence of Matthew 16, 27, and 28, and that is they appeal to the Transfiguration vision of Matthew chapter 17. After 6 days after saying he was going to come back in the glory of the Father with his angels and reward every man, after 6 days, Jesus took his apostles, some of them, and he went up on the Mount of Transfiguration. There he was transfigured before them. His face shined like the sun. His clothes shined whiter than any soap could ever get it. There appeared unto him with him Moses and Elijah. And Peter said, Lord, it's great for us to be here. If you will, let us build 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. And about that time, Moses and Elijah disappeared, and a voice from heaven, in the Hebrew it's called the Bath Kol, a voice from heaven said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. Now, in the Greek of Matthew chapter 17, it's in the emphatic mode. Now, emphatic mode. Here's what that means. It means that the voice from heaven says, this is my beloved Son, him hear. In other words, Moses and Elijah are no longer the authority. My Son is the divine, final spokesman. Him hear. Oh, the significance of that. I want to tell you what, folks. The significance of that statement and that vision has been, continues to be, unfortunately, greatly overlooked. Now, I have shared with you that Peter, in 2 Peter chapter 1, in answering the scoffers who were denying the coming of the Lord. Now, let me reiterate, they were not denying the day of the Lord per se. They were not denying its reality. What they were saying is, the church has been saying now for almost a full generation, the coming of the Lord is at hand. After all, Peter had written in 1 Peter chapter 1 that Christ was ready to be revealed. He wrote in 1 Peter chapter 4 that Christ was ready to judge the living and the dead. He wrote in verse 7, the end of all things has drawn near. And he wrote in verse 17, the time has come for the judgment to begin at the house of God. So the church had been saying for a generation that the coming of the Lord was near, coming soon, quickly and shortly. The scoffers, once again, were not denying the reality of the parousia, of the coming of the Lord. They were saying, okay, you've been saying it's at hand, coming quickly and shortly, so where is it? So Peter in 2 Peter is refuting the scoffers. How does he refute the scoffers? Well, he does that by appealing to the Transfiguration. We have not followed cunningly devised fables when we made known to you the power and the parousia of the Lord, the powerful coming of the Lord. For we were eyewitnesses of his glory, for we were with him on the holy mount when we heard the voice that said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Wherefore, we have the prophetic word made more sure, to which you do well that you take heed until the day star arises in your heart. So Peter, to refute the scoffers who are denying the coming of the Lord, that it was going to come soon, shortly, and quickly, Peter says, no. No, brethren, the coming of the Lord is sure. The coming of the Lord has been made more sure to us. Peter, how was the prophecy of the coming of the Lord, how were the prophecies of the day of the Lord made more sure? Peter says, well, because we were on the holy mountain, we saw the Transfiguration. The Transfiguration was a vision of Christ's second appearing. Now, some scoffers, a little bit of a pun there, some scoffers say, well, Peter was not saying that the Transfiguration was a vision of Christ coming. And they tell us, well, the Greek word parousia can have many different meanings. Well, it means presence. And why would Peter refer to something unrelated to Christ's coming to prove his coming? Peter was very clearly referring to the Transfiguration as proof of the parousia, the day of the Lord, which the scoffers were denying. But wait a minute. The Transfiguration was a vision of Christ's second coming. Now, here's what's amazing to me. Those who are trying to say the Transfiguration was not a vision of the second coming of Christ are the same people who say, oh, you know what, we're creedal, and you know what, we agree with church history, we're fully in line with the early church fathers, we teach what they teach. Well, if you deny that the Transfiguration was a vision of the second coming, you are completely out of step with church history. You are completely out of step with the church fathers, because almost, almost without exception, the early church fathers believed and they taught and they affirmed that the Transfiguration was a vision of Christ's second coming. So, all you scoffers, don't tell us that the Transfiguration was not a vision of Christ's second coming and yet affirm that you are in step with the early church fathers, because you're not. You are completely out of step with those early church fathers that you claim to follow, that you claim are, quote, authoritative, unquote. All right? Here's what I want you to see in the very little time that we have left this morning. The Transfiguration was a vision of the second coming of Christ. That's what Peter is affirming in 2 Peter chapter 1. Here's a question for you to contemplate. Was the Transfiguration a vision of the end of time? You know what? Not a word said in Matthew 17 about the end of time. Is the Transfiguration a vision of physical resurrection? Not a word said about it. Is the Transfiguration a vision of the destruction of literal physical heaven and earth? Not a word said about it. What did the Transfiguration envision? Wow, you have to catch the power of this. Remember, who appeared with Jesus on the mount? Moses and Elijah. What did Moses and Elijah represent? What did they symbolize? Moses represented the law of Moses. Moses represented God's old covenant with Israel. What did Elijah represent? Elijah represented the prophets. Okay. But on the mount, Moses and Elijah disappeared, and the voice from heaven said to the apostles, "This," speaking of Jesus, "is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Him hear." Folks, listen to me. Listen to me very carefully. Catch the power of this. The Transfiguration was a vision of the end of the Old Covenant world of Moses, the law, and the prophets. And we have more to say about that next week.